Hello and welcome to another episode of the RandomnessPod. And in this episode, we will talk about Bangladesh election results, uh, the future of political parties in Bangladesh, and India's geopolitical realignment towards our neighbor. Has Bangladesh become another Pakistan, or are we steering clear from all the complications? Election results are out, and to talk about that, we have the first guest of the Randomness Pod, Mr. Kallol Bhattacherjee, the senior assistant editor of The Hindu and one of the most seasoned voices in South Asian geopolitics. Welcome, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
How are you doing? How's life?
Yeah. I'm doing okay. I'm in Dibrugarh because it was the Lit Fest that I was attending. So yeah, from Dhaka, I went to Delhi for a little while and then came to Dibrugarh.
Well, any fest that you're attending must be lit by the slang lit, not the literature, but
Yeah, it was a good collection of people, very exciting. In fact, it's emerging as an interesting Lit Fest.
Do you
I
think?
hope you have been well.
Yeah, please. Do you think
I hope
the
you've been well too. Yeah.
yeah
Thank
yeah
you.
do you think I'm well. And do you think these literature festivals and symposiums like this should happen all over the country?
Well, they are happening all over the country, and they are giving platform to people to come together and find out what's really happening. Both nationally as well as around the world, because there is obviously so much of information that's available, but much of it is quite policed, quite controlled. And in the age of algorithm-driven interaction, that's mostly online. People love to come to halls and auditoriums and sit down and listen to a particular issue that is really hitting the primetime news, and then also participate in it. So I think it's a kind of a platonic platform that these these lit fests provide, and I think this is a good trend, and I really enjoy that whenever I do participate in them.
Do you also think it happened in the case of liberalization, as we see, Montek Singh sometimes claiming that we had a lot of uh, symposiums at the IIC or lit fests like these, and then that converted into lobbying, and then liberalization finally happened. So my question, what I'm coming to is, do you think the festivals like this or discussions like this can have effect on policy making in the longer run?
Yeah, I mean, they do mobilize public opinion. So yes, they do impact policy making in a certain way. And policymakers are also participating in these symposiums, and it's good for people like us who are observers and chroniclers and reporters and writers and analysts and policymakers. Though I don't think serving government officials participate in these events
Yeah.
unless they have government clearance. But a lot of the policy making, I would say, minds that influence policy in various levels, they do participate in think tanks, and that's, I think, is a good trend. In a society like ours, dialogue is essential. I mean, and dialogue is something that these lit fests provide. So yes, in the age when we know that television news has declined qualitatively, and they don't provide the kind of platform that they used to provide, say, 20 years ago. So in that case, I think lit fests are serving as some sort of a safety valve for our democracy.
So coming to the topic, the topic that we're discussing today, Bangladesh election result is out and BNP has emerged as victorious. What are the key takeaways from these election results when we talk about the domestic voter feelings of Bangladesh?
I didn't get that. The second part you said, the domestic voter.
The domestic voter feeling, for example, why did
What is the
BNP?
domestic voter feeling in Bangladesh? Yes. So I think I would address that first, because the moment the election happened and I started talking to the people on the streets, actually the first thing that they said, be it the vegetable seller or a shopkeeper or a young student, everybody said now things will get better. And they said that for the last 17 months or so, there was a sense of anarchy in the country. because the interim government that was led by a Nobel Peace Prize winner, that's Professor Yunus, was being led indeed by these group of very young men who were part of the uprising against Sheikh Hasina, and they were not willing to give the interim government the sort of space that's required for running the day-to-day function of the government, because it's essential for any government to run the day-to-day show, like providing security to the people, to providing the economy, the factors of stability, and etc. That was not coming from the interim government, and that was a major weakness with the interim government, and that left the common people in a great deal of difficulties in the last 17 months. And as you know, that the uprising happened against Sheikh Hasina. But the idea was not to prolong difficulties. The idea was to remove Sheikh Hasina's government and then have a better government as soon as possible. But that did not happen during the interim government's tenure. So the first thing that they said after the result of the election came was that now there will be a positive change, because now there will be police doing the policing duty more effectively, because what was happening in the last 1.5 years was that the Bangladesh police was not functioning efficiently, because if any society doesn't give space to the police to perform its duty, then that society will fall apart. And that is what was happening in terms of security and day-to-day comfort of living in Bangladesh. And so therefore, I would say that the first feeling that I saw among people was this feeling of relief. And that was really a heartening moment for me personally, because I've been following the difficulties that Bangladesh has been facing over the last 1.5 years. And there was a sense before the election that probably there could be some sort of uncertainty a day after the election. And there was indeed I would say a few hours of uncertainty till the election results came in. But as soon as the election results went in favor of the BNP, people felt reassured that since BNP has been an establishment political party, it is not some sort of a radical outfit that does not believe in the legacy of 1971 and etc. It is very much an establishment party. It has held authority in Bangladesh at least 4 times in the past, and people felt that this is a familiar organization that knows how to run the government, and there was all-round relief that now things will get better. But again, we have to see how Tariq Rahman conducts himself in the coming days. So far, it has been a nice gesture. He has been reaching out to all political rivals who have even accused him who have abused him rather in the past. But then he has reached out to all political rivals, and he has put out photographs of him sitting down with his political opponent. So I think this is a good reconciliatory move by the current government, which is just in the first few days of its tenure. And it looks like Tariq Rahman is behaving in a very mature manner. So it looks good in the initial days, but we'll see how things progress from here.
So we saw a positive voter turnout for Jamaat-e-Islami on the bordering districts of Bangladesh and India. How do you see that? Is Islamization a big issue, or was made a big issue in the current elections? Or like you said, it's more of the day-to-day activities or day-to-day hardships that people have to face? As we know, it's common in all the South Asian countries. Which was the bigger issue in these elections?
Well, people are obviously tired in Bangladesh. Nobody loves uprising, because uprisings and revolutions disrupt normal way of life. People want to go back home at the end of the day and just enjoy their normal lives, and nobody wants to be in this perennial or eternal revolution mode where they would be fighting every day, because that is not really an existence that can be described as normal, because that sort of existence can be described as the state of nature, where everybody is fighting everybody, and nobody wants that sort of a meltdown for their society. So the issue was fatigue. The issue was that common people were suffering. And obviously, that was giving space to people from these Islamist outfits like There is, of course, the Islami, Andolan Bangladesh, that's the Bangladesh political party. There is the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is another political party. Jamaat-e-Islami leads another political party. And then you have Jamaat-e-Islami, and then Jamaat-e-Islami affiliated outfits like the National Citizen Party, which essentially is composed of boys, rather young men, who came from the student wing of Jamaat-e-Islami. They have received a good number of votes, but what is more important is that this time the votes have actually translated into 68 seats for Jamaat-e-Islami itself, and an additional a few more seats, taking the total Islamist bloc's seat count to around 77 or 78. And then you have several independent MPs. A few of them are also Islamist oriented. So I would say that this time what has happened is that the parliament has thrown up these many Islamist members of the Jatiya Sansad, which is indicative of one thing, primarily that there was no contest from the polar opposite party of the Islamists, because the Awami League was not in the battlefield this time. So that gave the voters to consolidate their votes only towards the Islamists, because otherwise there would have been a contest. Usually what happens is that the Awami League is the fanatical nationalist political party. And on the other hand, you have BNP, which is a centrist right political organization. And then you have the extreme right political formations like the Jamaat-e-Islami. So this time it was a contest between the extreme right and center right. And what happened at the end was that the supporters of Awami League voted en masse for BNP. So what happened in the final situation was such that the center-right political party, that is BNP, turned into an umbrella organization consisting of both center-right, center, as well as center-left supporters, that is the Awami League supporters, all coming together to support BNP. Because BNP stands for the legacy of 1971, the liberation war, and ultimately the independent idea of Bangladesh as a nation state. I would say that the Islamists were able to get votes, but then by getting two-third majority, because since Awami League is not in the fray, so Awami League has not been able to cut into the vote share. So as a result, most of the Awami League seats or the Awami League votes have also gone to BNP and giving it two-third majority. So because of the fact that BNP has received two-third majority, BNP has come to the parliament with a massive, number of seats, a brute force, two-third majority. So they can do whatever they want very much in the parliament. So though the Jamaat-e-Islami and the Islamists have received number of seats in the parliament, they won't be able to do anything to harass the BNP, because BNP is super strong in the parliament. So that way, I think, they have received votes, but then they will not be very effective inside the parliament. And in parliamentary democracy, they won't be very effective. And that became very obvious in day one when the BNP took oath only for the membership of parliament. That is, the 2012 members took oath for becoming members of the parliament and to represent their constituencies in the Bangladesh parliament. And since the election commission had also twined another oath with this particular oath, saying that everybody in the parliament should also take the oath for reforming or reviewing the constitution of Bangladesh, their BNP's leaders, most importantly Salahuddin Ahmed, they put their feet down, saying that they will not take the oath to change the constitution, because as members of parliament, they take the oath to uphold the constitution. So what happened subsequently was that Jamaat was completely caught off guard, because Jamaat had decided to take both the oaths, the membership of the parliament as well as to reform the constitution. And then they took both the oaths, and what BNP has done ever since is that BNP has been harassing the Jamaat members, saying that they have negated their parliamentary oaths because they have also taken the oath to reform the constitution, which negates the first oath. So I think Jamaat is slightly raw when it comes to understanding of how parliamentary democracies and parliamentary procedures function. So there, the BNP is also stronger than Jamaat. So BNP will manage well as far as parliamentary politics is concerned, because there is a great deal of politics that takes place inside a parliament. So that way they are doing well, and And you mentioned about Islamization. I think Bangladesh is a Muslim majority country, but Bangladesh is also a country with its own unique history. So, for example, today you and I are discussing Bangladesh on a day which is dedicated to the history of the mother tongue, that is Bangla language in Bangladesh, and it is on the basis of that language and on the basis of language-based nationalism that Bangladesh's political journey began in 1952, even when it was under so-called Urdu domination of West Pakistan. And then that Urdu domination was ended in 1971. So look at it from that point of view that, one can say that it is a Muslim majority country, but it always has its angularities and its own dimensions through which it defines its national character. So I would say that, yes, in this election, the Islamists have received 78 seats. But overall, since BNP has emerged as an umbrella political organization, it is not going to be easy for the Islamists to mobilize, further. Jamaat has never received so many votes in its history. The largest number of votes that Jamaat received, rather, largest number of seats that Jamaat received was in 1999. Sorry, 1991. I'm getting the date wrong here. So 1991 was the year in which Jamaat had received 18 seats. So this time they have got 78 seats in that Islamist alliance. So it's quite obvious that this is an unprecedented surge for Jamaat, and things can't get any better than this. And I think they shouldn't be overconfident, because Bangladeshi politics has a way of teaching lesson to even the most powerful. And we saw what happened to Sheikh Hasina's party just 1.5 years ago. So I think, yeah, it is looking so far manageable from the political party point of view.
So my other question, reiterating to your point about how Jamaat-e-Islamis don't have the nuance to understand the parliamentary politics as to the level of the BNP, but do they have the understanding of the street mob mandate as we saw during the revolution? I mean, what I've observed is that any anti-India sentiment turns anti-minority real quickly on the street, and of course, these splinter groups might have had a role to play in that. What are your views on that?
Well, the anti-minority problem of Bangladesh is very old. It goes back to the Dhaka violence of 1946-47, and even when after partition we had the great Borishal killings of 1950. These are all part of history that we remember. And ever since, whenever we had any communal issue or any communal development in India, like the Babri Masjid demolition or similar incidents, we saw what happened also during 2018, 19, 20. There was a lot of communal rhetoric emanating from, say, West Bengal assembly election and Assam assembly election. We saw there were repercussions also inside Bangladesh as far as the Hindu minority community is concerned. So that is both a political problem as well as a socio-economic problem, because minorities in East Bengal, or rather if in Bangladesh, are always they have a history of being well-to-do people. They have had land, they had education, they were mostly socially, upwardly mobile, zamindars and etc. So that had a sort of a backing of a certain revolutionary segments of Bangladeshi society, historically speaking, because since the Hindus were mostly in zamindari, and that was a problem that when power was shifting from, say, 1946 onwards, these issues became prominent, and the so-called, grabbing, land grab, and etc. happened. Now, of course, Hindus are more in government professions. They are in academics, they are in police administration all over Bangladesh. They are in diplomacy. So it becomes very visible that the minority representation in Bangladesh is quite visible. Be it any TV channel that you open in Bangladesh, you will find a Hindu journalists, and one does not. I'm not trying to project them as Hindu journalists. They are Bangladeshi Hindu communities members, so they are doing well. So these things come to the surface. That social factor comes to the surface when you have something happening in neighboring India. That is quite obvious, and it is a history of that. And then there is a socio-economic aspect of it in which the government needs to do more to ensure that the local level politics and local level animosities are controlled and things are maintained in a so that they don't reach a critical mass point when it comes to the social dynamics in any place. Thirdly, I would say that the attacks on the minority community that we have seen, I'm coming to the final point, but I would present it in this way, that the attacks on the minority community is a reflection of the overall the breakdown in the law and order system, in which the majority community has been attacking the majority community in very large number. We should also not forget that most of the violence that has happened in the last 17 months, starting with the fall of Sheikh Hasina government, was actually targeted against the Muslim community itself, the members of the Muslim community. So much, we don't get to hear in India about this, but the fact is that most of the victims in these incidents of violence, be it casualties or injuries, etc., were inflicted upon members of the Muslim community because they were politically motivated. Now I'm coming to the final point about the attacks on the Hindu, particularly Hindu and Buddhist communities, and also ethnic minorities of Chittagong Hill Tract. These attacks were partly facilitated by the absence of effective policing on the ground. We had incidents of theft of jewelry from Hindu temples. Now, we all know that Hindu temples have generally or traditionally jewelry because devotees do bring jewelry to the deities wherever the temples are located. Look at India or elsewhere in the world, wherever you have a Hindu temple, the jewelry will be there. So there were theft of jewelry from Hindu temples because there was no effective policing for the last 17 months. The police was seen as being complicit in the crackdown on peaceful or other protesters in the July-August movement against Sheikh Hasina. So what happened in this case was that the police was painted as the great villain of Bangladesh. And as a result, the people felt that they had a moral right to assault a policeman when they saw one. As a result, the police would not come to your rescue if you were being harassed by your enemies on the streets. So there were lots of these incidents where people were calling the police, but the police would not turn up because they feared that if they turned up, then the situation would actually get out of hand, out of control. So these attacks on the minority community were also a symptom of the larger breakdown in the law and order situation inside Bangladesh. So I'm saying that apart from the historical issues, apart from the socio and economic issues, there were also these very real governance-related issues that we saw and in the way these attacks took place in the minority communities of Bangladesh. And one of the most important issue was the absence of effective policing. So we have to see if the current government led by Tariq Rahman manages to create that condition in which the policing can take place once again effectively. And only then perhaps these attacks can be controlled. Because even today, as we speak, there is a lot of fear in Bangladesh, frankly speaking, especially among the minority communities. So only an effective policing can take care of these concerns.
So what do you think future holds for Sheikh Hasina or the Awami League? Because on the one hand, there were talks about how democracy is not being completely functional with Awami League not participating in the elections. And while because now parliament is again and an elected government is again back, so democracy is still functioning. So how do you see that contrast? I mean, Awami League was not allowed to participate. And what do you think future holds for Sheikh Hasina and her political career?
Yeah, thank you so much. That you asked this question. Shashank, the historic fact is that Sheikh Hasina came through a genuine election in 2009. And she got a resounding political victory in 2008-9 election. There is no doubt about it. But from 2014 onwards, all the three elections that took place in Bangladesh were either rigged or were absolutely fake and fraudulent. So when Sheikh Hasina says that election in Bangladesh is not genuine, then that has to be taken with a generous amount of salt. We know that we have to agree with the facts of history. Uh, I would say that even in 2014, when that election was obviously being rigged, popular anger was not so high because Sheikh Hasina was fighting a very tough battle against these elements who war against the idea of Bangladesh. So they felt that she will reform. There would be some sort of a reconciliation between her and her critics, because her critics are also from the tradition of 1971. Both Sheikh Hasina as well as her critics, that is BNP, and also others in civil society, they all are nationalist people. They all love their country, they love their freedom. They are not anti-Bangladesh. So the point, however, is that from 2018 onwards, it became absolutely brazen. And the 2014 election was absolutely disastrous because it was a fraudulent election. So when Sheikh Hasina says that elections are being rigged in Bangladesh, let's understand one thing, that Sheikh Hasina is making a point about an issue on which she does not have full moral authority because of her past actions. Now we have to come to the point, what is Army League? Army League has an enormous amount of love and affection for Sheikh Hasina. So much so that all her mistakes will be forgiven. And she will be acknowledged once again as the leader of Army League if she decides to declare that she will take charge of the party tomorrow directly. But the fact is, the people around Sheikh Hasina, all the top ministers of her government, they are not at all acceptable to the Army League supporters on the ground, because they are holding these people responsible for the downfall of the party from the high position of authority that it once used to hold to what it became ultimately, because they accused these individuals of being responsible for turning the party of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman from being an ideological platform to a de-ideologized platform, if I can use that term, in which money became the most important factor for political life. So I talked to a lot of Army League supporters who are on the ground in Bangladesh, and they have dealt with a lot of difficulty, including harassment and attacks, etc., in the last 17 months. But they say very clearly that Sheikh Hasina is the daughter of Mujibur Rahman, and that is why she is, loved by everyone. But they also say that she also committed a lot of mistakes, and she has to own those mistakes and move on. But her companions, especially the top ministers of infrastructure and road transport, the Minister of Home, Asaduzzamani Khan Kamal, he and many others, they are, in fact, these are Army League people who accuse these ministers of Sheikh Hasina of committing tremendous corruption in Bangladesh. And they don't want these people to return and take charge of Army League. So Army League's future lies in discovering new leaders among its supporters who are today inside Bangladesh. Because it's also a matter of, who has supported the party and who has remained in the country, and who are the people who left the country as well as left the political party that nurtured their political career. So it's quite obvious that, please go ahead.
Do you also think there was also a lot of talks going on? There was also a lot of conversation about the Bangladeshi army and how they will react to this. Do you think the army behaved maturely in the last 17
Well, I
18
think
months?
the army has played its hands quite carefully, because the Bangladeshi army is an international force. And any action by the Bangladeshi military would have been examined by the international powers with a magnifying glass. And they would have attracted immediate sanction from the West had they moved and done something radical, taking charge and etc. Because let's face the fact that Bangladesh is not Pakistan. In Pakistan, the military can take charge and the Pakistani military general can go to White House. But a Bangladeshi general will not receive that kind of welcome. So therefore, it would be a lose-lose game for Bangladeshi generals if they had moved. And they have not done that mistake. So what has happened now is that because of a successful election in which a particular party has received very clear mandate from the people, the Bangladeshi military has no other option but to go back to the barracks. And that is what they have been asking. And Tariq Rahman has indicated that by meeting with the three services chiefs immediately after taking charge, after his being sworn in, one of the first meetings that Tariq Rahman held was with the three services chiefs. So it's quite obvious that the Bangladeshi military has rather conducted itself with, with a sense of responsibility, and they have not done anything that can be described as completely. They described the election record of Sheikh Hasina's government in the last three general elections is not something that we can say about the army. Army hasn't done anything like that. Haven't supported
I
anybody.
asked this question because not further east from Bangladesh we have Myanmar, or Burma as we colloquially use the term, and Burma
Yeah,
is not not discussed in our public South Asian
at
discourse
all. Yeah.
as Pakistan or now Bangladesh very recently. So how do you analyze the decision of Om Birla, our Lok Sabha speaker, respected Lok Sabha speaker, going to the swearing-in ceremony?
Dhaka.
Was he the adequate representative of India in the swearing
Yeah,
ceremony?
he represents the Lok Sabha, which, but in principle, it is the council of the parliament where the people of India send their representatives directly. So he is the chief official of the Lok Sabha. So in that way, it is kind of democracy to democracy dialogue or an outreach. So I think yeah, it was a nice gesture. I won't say. It
Yeah.
required probably I would have been happier if the external affairs minister had come, but I think it is also nice and a nice gesture that India has made by sending Om Birla. Because there was a lot of criticism in Bangladesh that in the last 15 years, especially from 2014 onwards, Bangladesh-India relation has looked like, from the Bangladeshi point of view, as if it was a state to party relation, because India was making it very clear that it was favoring a particular political party and not the people of Bangladesh. So I think that message has been sent that we are in favor of a state to state relation or a people to people relation, and not just state to party relation, because Bangladesh has been quite critical of India's position on Army League over the last 15 years, that India seems to be favoring Army League absolutely, clearly. But that is something that has been conveyed clearly by sending Om Birla, that now India wants to move in a direction where Bangladesh would not have the chance of complaining that it is a state to party relation. It is a people to people relation. It is a government to government relation.
So, sir, there has been, regular political signaling in India, especially when the Bengal elections come to the forefront. That there's been how the Bengali government or the West Bengal government is not protecting the borders, or how they're letting in the Bangladeshi infiltrators or illegal immigrants. So, how does the Bangladeshi domestic politics play out with regard to this, or what are the conversations in the public discourse that happen in Dhaka when we talk about this? I would not use the term hate, but there has been an anti-Bangladeshi immigration. Of course, illegal immigration should not be given any leeway. So, what do you think about the illegal immigration issue from the Indian point of view, and what are the conversations that are being going on in the Bangladesh regarding to this issue?
No, very good question, Shashank. And we have to remember that India-Bangladesh border is not like India-China boundary. India-China boundary is in a as I recently was referring to the remarks by the retired Army Chief of India, General Naravane, who described the India-China boundary as boundary and not as border, because border is a recognized entity, whereas boundary is somehow nebulous or undefined. India-Bangladesh boundary is actually an India-Bangladesh border. It is defined, it is recognized, and it is settled by a treaty that both India and Bangladesh have signed in June 2015. So when we say that there is illegal immigration happening from a certain side, then we have to understand that one party is accusing the other of violating that agreement and that treaty. Now, the fact is it possible to violate that agreement when you have armed guards on both sides guarding the settled border? Therefore, we have to make a distinction between what is said at the level of political rhetoric in the times of elections in India and what is really the facts on the ground and what are the legal issues on the ground. The legal reality is that India and Bangladesh have a settled border, and the treaty that both sides have signed on this issue is called the Land Boundary Agreement. And it has taken years and years, if not decades, to do this agreement called Land Boundary Agreement, LBA. What has been happening from the Indian side is that during the time of election, especially state elections, there is a lot of talk about illegal immigration from Bangladesh. And the hint is therefore given that this illegal immigration adds to the surge in minority vote bank in the bordering states, that is West Bengal and Assam and Tripura. And therefore, these minority vote banks contribute to the to supporting a particular side, and that is really problematic because what happens here is that it vilifies a certain community, and that certain community is the majority community across the border, and that creates trouble not just between the two sides at the level of politics; it also creates a diplomatic and strategic setback for India. So what we see in effect is that it is a political process inside India that eats into or interferes in India's management of the South Asian region, and that is problematic, and that gives a setback to India's strategic ambition. That is how I look at the minority, the issue of illegal immigration, as you are pointing out. But if we really have to look at illegal immigration as a clinical matter that needs to be controlled and addressed, there are mechanisms. There are steps that can be taken. One can issue, say, cards to people who are coming from Bangladesh to work in India. They can be given identity documents of other. They can be there could be special phone numbers through which these immigrants, we can call them seasonal immigrants who are doing certain kinds of works in India and then going back, so that we can encourage them to contribute to the Indian economy and then go back. And they don't need to vote, so to say that they will not have full political rights, but they will have certain civil and democratic rights, economic rights they can exercise here, and then they can go back to their home. So that way, both sides can benefit. Because I think what is necessary is to find a humane solution to this problem. Because at the end of the day, even Indians go to other countries to earn a living, and it is also a matter of concern for us when Indians are treated badly in other countries. So we have to remember that from that point of view also, that what we accuse others of doing to us, sometimes we may also get accused of doing the same thing. So that could be a problematic thing.
So, reiterating back to the point that you mentioned, that we should look out for some formal arrangement for cross-border exchange of labor or workers.
Yeah, because by now we are getting the whole Indian approach to the issue. Also, is that India is concluding what it terms as mobility agreements, because we all understand that people do move across the border in search of jobs, in search of livelihood, and as long as it is movement across the border in search of jobs and livelihood, there is not really any problem. Problem begins when somebody is a criminal. Problem begins when someone has committed a violent crime and therefore seeking refuge in a certain country. That is when problems begin. Otherwise, India is concluding these agreements with, say, Germany, with multiple other countries, including with Japan, where India will be supplying workers. And Bangladesh is also doing these agreements. In fact, the interim government has done this agreement with Japan, where Bangladesh will be sending a lot of their workers to participate in Japan's the job sector. So the issue, therefore, is not really about movement of people. So if India sits down with Bangladesh and says that, look, every year, these many number of people are coming from your country to my country, and these many people can actually work in these sectors, and therefore these people will be welcome. And we will obviously not allow any criminal element to come in and etc. That should not be. I think that is a way to have a civil discussion. Instead of turning everything into a political issue for election's sake, and then again the politicians will move on, and they will forget that they at all raised this matter in the election. If there is cross-border movement, whether it is from Nepal and India or Bangladesh and India, we don't really have to attack each other because we are neighbors. And Bangladesh and India, let's face the truth, Bangladesh is, some people do discuss Bangladesh through the frame or the prism of Pakistan. And I think that is a great disservice because that only insults the people of Bangladesh further. Because Pakistan got its, Bangladesh got its independence from Pakistan. And Bangladeshis have a very acute sense of who they are, especially the government and their, the top section of their society. So one has to always remember that we can't look at every neighbor through this prism of Pakistan or a prism of hostility, because in the long run, we will be the ones who will lose our strategic footprint in South Asian neighborhood if we don't maintain constructive relation with neighbors like Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bhutan, and of course Myanmar. I mean, obviously we can't do anything about Pakistan. Pakistan is a difficult neighbor. It's a hostile neighbor. It repeatedly announces its hostile intentions as far as India is concerned. But other neighbors can be, dealt in a little better way, I would say.
Even Pakistan, for that matter. So when we see European countries, they've more or less forgotten their bloody past, whether you talk about England or France or Germany. What is it that the common populace or even the political leadership, because then again, political leadership have to keep in mind the fallouts of their decisions, that we have not been able to make up with the fact that we are now different nations with certain communities that are in majority or in minority? Is it the classic case of us not being able to, because deal with the partition, whether it's about India and Pakistan, and now even in Pakistan's domestic politics, the partition or the separating of Bangladesh in 71. I think it becomes more of an emotional issue for the larger South Asian population. What do you think about that?
Well, you mentioned the partition, and partition opened social, partition took place because there was a social rift. What has happened subsequently is that the entities that were born out of the partition got further partitioned. That is the partition of Pakistan in 1971, of the vivisection of Pakistan in 1971. And these societies, therefore, are not just traumatized and divided once. These societies are traumatized repeated. For example, the bureaucracy of East Pakistan, erstwhile East Pakistan, that is the bureaucracy of Bangladesh, did not even recover fully from the injuries of 1947 when it got divided again in 1971. So today, when we look at the bureaucracy, the judiciary, the media, and many such organs of Bangladesh, we see that the capacity building and these sort of terms that we use, even in India, for example, sometimes we find that the judiciary is not able to behave in a very professional manner. There are questions about the judiciary. Sometimes the Indian media fails to behave in a totally professional, impartial manner. Very often we find the institutions of the state behaving as if it has been captured by certain forces. So these are the remnants of our highly conflicted and highly troublesome past. Sometimes we can describe them as the genetic remnants of colonial times, because that is how the colonial power is to conduct its affairs inside India. Because how did the colonial power manage to remain in India for so long? It remained in India by capturing these institutions and by making these institutions to do very, very unfair things. And then they prolonged these unfair treatment of people at various levels would then allow the colonial system to persist. And it persisted for more than, as we remember, more than a century. So what happens in these societies, therefore, is that these societies have many rifts, many fault lines. And whenever a political process, like say transfer of power or a popular election, when a political process takes place in such societies that have troublesome history, these rifts and these old fault lines open up, and then politics is played on that basis. So instead of say talking about education, water, and sanitation, which are even today vital necessities for countries in South Asia, we find ourselves getting caught on sectarian and communal and confessional issues. That is what political scientists describe these issues as. That confessionalism. That is like you have to tell who you, which religion or what faith you belong to before you move ahead in life. But whereas in a developed, or rather in an evolved society, your work or your profession should be your identity,
But
not
then
what
again,
caste or what.
in India,
Sorry.
profession is the identity, and that profession is more or less based on caste.
Again, it also has that problematic issue. So so what's happening here is that the political process does not serve the larger public interest. It serves the rifts that exist already in society. So they deepen these fault lines, and these political processes then deepen the rifts that further create complications for proper governance, addressing day-to-day difficulties that common people have to face. I mean, look at the difficulties that a common man has to face in a city like Delhi or in a city like Bombay. I mean, look at the difficulties that common people have to face when commuting in Bombay's famously overcrowded local trains. I mean, is it
The
easy to
spirit
travel in
of
those?
Bombay.
Yeah, these are described as spirit of Bombay. But who would not like to travel a little comfortably to his or her place of work? And I just saw in Dhaka the difficulties that people have put up for so long. I mean, the traffic signals, for example, in Dhaka never worked in the last so many months, and that is in a society, and that is in a city where traffic was always horrible. So, in a city where traffic was already bad, the lack of policing turned traffic into absolute nightmare. So people would sit for hours on the streets and not reach their office and places of work, and then return after sitting half a day on the streets. So, life is not easy, and governments need to help people live in relative comfort. Common people, I was talking to this gentleman in Dhaka, and he said very sweetly that they don't want anything from their government. They just want their government to ensure that there is little safety on the streets so that he can sell his vegetables when he has to, when the day begins, and that he can come back home safely without getting, harmed by some antisocial elements.
The
And
same is the
that he
case in
said,
India.
exactly. I mean, in most of the South Asian countries, that is the case. The states are not expected to provide the common people with the luxuries of say of a developed society, but the bare minimum that they want is little bit of fair treatment, a little bit of control of the prices of essential commodities, and a little bit of law and order, so that the person, when he is moving on the streets to do his job or his business, is not harmed by some antisocial element. I think that's really the bare minimum that people in this region demand from their government, and I think it's quite unfair if that is not provided.
It's very unfair to us. And before you started talking about colonialism, I was myself was coming to the point of colonialism. Or how much is colonialism to blame for this? When we talk about the Western sector, when the well irrigated areas or wheat producing areas went to Pakistan, or the classic case of East Pakistan and West Bengal, when the jute producing area went to the East Pakistan and the mills or the industries were in
Yeah.
West Bengal, and then which creates socio-economic insecurity, and then the riots and sectarian violence. So colonialism is still to blame for it. And one more point that I wanted to add is what happens in our public discourse, or the general public conversations that happen around better services. When we talked about the local trains of Bombay and how overcrowded they are, then the blame directly shifts to population, and the overpopulation, ignoring the unequal distribution of resources. It focuses on overpopulation, and when we talk about overpopulation, then we have already sorted out certain communities who are to blame for overpopulation. So then that becomes another. Even if we talk about basic amenities, you'll find people on the streets talking about how overpopulated we are, because we are. Of course, we can't ignore the carrying capacity of the land. But then the term social pollution comes into forefront, and we know who are the recipients of that hate. But
No, I
anyway,
think population is not a bad thing. Population becomes population dividend when you have to bring a discourse about economic growth, right? But the moment you talk about law and order and the duty of the government or the duty of the state to provide for the people, there the population becomes a challenge. So the issue is that population is something that is used conveniently, depending on what sort of a debate that you are in. I mean, when you talk about, oh, India should be a developed country, then, well, India has a huge population, therefore India has a huge market, and therefore India is attractive. So, I mean, if India was a country of the size of Belgium, do you think India would have been in the growth chain of the world that India finds itself today? No, I don't think so. But then the population is a good thing when we are talking about economic growth. But population is a challenge if we ask the state to provide decent conditions of living. Well, I think that should not be the case. I think there has to be transparency when we discuss any of these issues.
And yes, we can take the example of Brazil. I mean, they have around 20-25 crores population, more resources, more land than India. Still, there is huge economic divide. So population is not the only reason for,
Yeah, it's not always the only thing, only factor. There are multiple factors always.
So we're coming towards the end of this episode, and we have the India and US signed an executive orders of the trade deal. So did the US and Bangladesh. Uh, it's making rounds that Indian farmers, especially the cotton farmers, will be exposed to stiff US competition without being protected with robust measures domestically, as Bangladesh used to import a lot of cotton from India. How do you think the US Bangladesh trade deal, is Bangladesh trying to realign itself vis-a-vis Beijing, Delhi, and Washington? Or the US is now seeing Bangladesh as a major trading partner, or is just another whims of POTUS, Donald Trump?
Well, thanks again for that interesting question, because Bangladesh and Nepal are overland trading partners of India. And just because of that single factor, both Bangladesh and Nepal are traditionally among the top 10 trading partners of India across the world. Unfortunately, because of the records of history, India and Pakistan, despite having a common boundary, a common border, they don't share that sort of trade relationship. So Pakistan is out of that equation completely. So what we have is that in South Asia, in the neighborhood, that is, Bangladesh and Nepal are two of the top regional trading partners of India, and globally speaking, they are among the top 10 trading partners. India's trade with Bangladesh has been in the range of 12 to 14 billion US dollars annually. Out of those 12 to 14 billion US dollars, nearly 1.5 to 1.8 to say 2 billions used to be the import of cotton, yarn, and raw cotton by Bangladesh from the cotton producing regions of India, mostly Punjab and Maharashtra. Now, Bangladesh, because of its unique history and its economy, depends on Maharashtra for two great things. One is onion, the other is cotton. And and it is my understanding that the onion farmers of Nashik can actually trigger a revolution in Bangladesh, because that right now, of course, this is the month of Ramadan in Bangladesh, and a lot of culinary choices explode in Bangladesh in this season, because every evening after iftar, after the evening prayers, the time for iftar begins. So a lot of festive eating and etc., dining etc. happens, and there is a lot of demand for onions, and this is the season in which the demand for onions spikes, and then comes the 7 to 10 days long celebration for Eid, and that again is a period in which onion demand goes up. And Bangladesh last year witnessed onion being sold at 300 rupees per kg. So that was a huge issue in Bangladesh, and the people were very, very upset about this matter. So what I'm saying is that among the 12 to 14 billion annual trade between India and Bangladesh, nearly 2 billion trade used to be just on cotton yarns and cotton, raw cotton from India. And let us remember that that um, that that 12 billion trade that India has with Bangladesh is actually totally um, weighed in India's favor, and Bangladesh does not complain about it. It is something that Bangladesh has to live with. So, in this sort of a trade relationship comes the rocket of US Bangladesh Trade Pact. And when is it hitting? This trade pact is hitting India in one of its largest trading relationship in the region. So I'm looking at it from the point of view of strategic that you asked about if the India-US trade is going to impact. So it's quite obvious that India-Bangladesh trade, at least 2 billion of that trade, of that total trade, is getting affected just by the American declaration that now Bangladesh will have zero tariff on its RMG, that is ready-made garments, if that RMG is produced by US-grown cotton. And that will then translate into profit for the textile makers, the RMG makers in Bangladesh. Now, you look at it from this point of view that we are only talking about the trade. Now, let me bring in the letter that President Trump has written to the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, that is Tariq Rahman. In the letter, President Trump says that this particular agreement must be implemented, in full, that is the trade agreement. And then he goes on to say that Bangladesh should also conclude a security agreement or a defense agreement with the United States. So it's quite obvious what the superpower wants in South Asia. That superpower is not only taking away India's regional trade partners. The superpower is also creating a new defense partner, a new security partner of the superpower in India's neighborhood, immediate neighborhood. So these are issues that will unfold in the time that we are envisaging will play out now, because it's not something that will happen in distant future. This is a very, very, if one can say, a very dynamic situation in a volatile region. And things will not happen in some uncertain future. This is happening in real time. We saw an election happen in Bangladesh. Immediately thereafter, President Trump writes to the Prime Minister, Tariq Rahman, that we want this particular trade agreement to be implemented in full. And then finally he says that there should be the defense agreement also. So these are, the trade deal is not just a trade deal. It is a strategic tool to further enhance the superpowers' interactions and its presence in South Asia.
And to solve that, let us discuss about Vande Mataram for again 4 hours in the parliament, because you remember that how now before the national anthem, all the stanzas of Vande Mataram would be. I don't even think किसी नेता को आता भी होगा पूरा वंदे मातरम जो बंकिम चंद्र चटर्जी जी ने लिखा है. Anyway, oh. So if this is so fragile for India, like US can just come in and kick us out of the trade. We also know how US's agriculture is very large scale. whose farmers are subsidized. And Indian farmers are mostly, they're very averse to any trade shock. Margins are already thin. And it also affects the MSMEs, which are the backbone of our manufacturing sector. So how can we tackle the solution? Because this looks bleak for us.
Yes, I mean, the issue is that much of this discussion, be it with the United States or with, there was this before this in 2022, we had the I2U2 agreement involving the UAE, Israel, United States. And now we have done one more agreement with the European Union. Most of these discussions are conducted in a non-transparent manner because these are trade-related negotiations, and the other side also is not willing to allow much public scrutiny of these negotiations. So trade has its own limited, this thing as far as the public scrutiny is possible. But then we need greater and more transparent. At least the documents will have to be examined in full by the public and by experts and the media, and thorough discussion and analysis in public is necessary. I mean, what we know about the agriculture aspect from, say, the India-EU agreement itself is quite surprising, because India is opening up the fruit sector, as if the fruit sector is not agriculture sector. And when we hear the government sources talk, they talk about the agriculture sector not being opened up, but the fruits are being opened up. So as you know, that's sort of creating sections and segments just doesn't work. And so we have similar concerns also about the India-US trade agreement, because we know that the United States produces agriculture at an industrial scale.
Yes.
Whereas India is a self-sufficient country in food, but whereas the United States is literally the industrial scale producer of agricultural products. So we have to really be cautious when we get down to opening India's agriculture sector. But so far, the government is saying that it will ultimately be visible in the next 3 to 4 months. I know in today's time and age, with fast communication and really fast transportation, the impact of the trade agreement with the US would be visible to us by, say, the month of June, because by then our market will be seeing what all items come to our market, and then we'll be also able to evaluate what is really the fine print of these agreements.
Because even if the tariff is reduced from 30% to 15% for, say, certain imported products, and the government protection has not been reduced, or has not been completely altered, but still the margins are so thin for Indian markets that they decisively put them out of market, maybe in the near future. Well, with this, we end this episode of the Randomness Pod. Thank you so much, Kallol, for joining me again.
Thank you so much, Shatan.
It was a delightful conversation. Not delightful in the sense that how the things are going on.
No, thank you. It's always nice to chat with you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, and I hope to meet you again soon when you're in Delhi.
Yeah, see you.
And enjoy the Lit Fest.
Okay.
See you soon. All right. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.